evening. So nice to see all of you all here. Thanks very much for coming. This is our second Asian House and Home Property Investors Meet. To start with, I would like to request everybody to put their mobile off or put it on silent. Because when our speakers are speaking, we wouldn't want them to be disturbed. And I'm sure everybody would like to listen to what exactly they are saying too. First, I would like to invite Suresh Waghjani, who is the director of Swan Reap Limited, whom I've known for last 12 years, whom I've been working with for quite some time. He writes regularly in Asian Voice, week in and week out, and he is quite well known within our readership. He who would be the host today. Can I request Mr. Suresh Waghjani to come on and take the stage, please?
Thank you. Thank you, George. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending. We've got a full house tonight. And actually, you're very lucky to be here because the event was oversubscribed. Unsurprising, given that it's about saving money. And we're all Indians here. We all like to save money. And thirdly, it's absolutely free, thanks to our sponsors, Metro Bank. And of course, CB Patel, whose wave this event is riding off. This event is a prequel to the launch of the Asian House and Homes magazine, which should be coming out in 2 weeks. The format of the evening is you're going to have an intro by me, then I'll introduce the panel one by one. Then we'll be putting some pre-written questions to the panel. I'll summarize, and then we'll open up the floor for any questions the audience may have. So if anything comes to mind, just please hold fire and remember it till the end of after the panel has finished speaking. So let's start the evening by looking at the theme for tonight. The title of tonight is The Perfect Storm or Navigating the Headwind. The perfect storm is a rare occurrence of a combination of circumstances which would aggravate a situation drastically. Let me read that again because it took me a while to get my head around it. The perfect storm is a rare occurrence of a combination of circumstances which will aggravate a situation drastically. If we apply this to the current property environment, we have a situation where there has been several rounds of stamp duty changes and an unfair tax on property income. This has had massive knock-on effects and changed the landscape drastically. Only a decade ago, one could purchase property with no money in their pocket and just a clean credit. A headwind is defined as a wind which blows against the direction of travel. Currently, the environment is not as conducive as it was for residential investment. Tonight, we'll be taking a close look at this new environment and with the help of our esteemed panel, looking at how best to navigate this new terrain. A problem is half solved when it is understood. The issues will be illustrated threadbare by our panel, leaving you with a clearer picture. Let us first take a step back from the actual issues and understand what force has given rise to these changes. Money is required by the Treasury to fill an insatiable black hole. Property has been seen as the obvious target. With only a relatively small percentage of the voting bank, landlords make up approximately 1.75 million of the population. This seems the obvious place to start without causing too much collateral damage to the government's voting bank. Property owners are likely to be conservative and unlikely to change their voting habits. Rest assured, an analysis was done and you have been watched in a very calculating and manipulated way. All of this darker tax environment has been exasperated by the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers. There is now a call for greater transparency. After all, you can only tax a transaction if you can track it. So let me start by introducing the panel. Let me start with Richard Margrave, who's the local director of Metro Bank. Do you want to say a few words, Richard?
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Before I begin, I just want to make sure that they're aware that there's a joint sponsor. It's not just us. Galliard Homes have also been a sponsor. George asked me to make you aware of that. So welcome everybody. I'm Richard Margrave. I'm the local director at Metro Bank in Harrow. Now I see some familiar faces tonight, so I do know a number of you know me and know Metro Bank. However, a number of you don't. And so this is an opportunity just to spend a couple of minutes of me talking a bit more about Metro Bank, what makes us different, and how we can help you. So if I go back to 2010, July 2010, the revolution in banking started with the launch of the first branch of store, shall I say, of Metro Bank. And since that time, we've had a very simple model that we followed, that we take in deposits, we lend them out at a margin, take off the cost, that's the profit. So it's a very simple model we follow. The main difference though is in our approach. We are completely customer-centric bank. And by that we put customers at the centre of everything we do, offering them unparalleled levels of service and convenience. Now it's one thing to say that, but it's another thing to do it. And it's quite a challenging culture to have that everybody putting in the same direction. So to do that, what we're trying to do is create fans, create fans, not customers. And how we do that? By focusing on this service convenience. So for the convenience point of view, our stores are only shut 3 days a year. So that's Christmas Day, New Year's Day, Easter Sunday. They're open Monday to Friday, 8 in the morning to 8 at night. So you can go on your way into work or your way back. They're open Saturdays, 8 till 6, Sundays 11 to 5. So really you can do the banking when it suits you and no appointment is necessary. From the service point of view, when you go in and see somebody, they're not targeted to sell you anything. They're targeted to give you a great experience. So you go away, tell your friends and family, and get them to come in. So Metro spends very little on advertising. It's all word of mouth advertising. We can open accounts quickly. We do everything in store. So we pick your card, your checkbook. We download the app to your smartphone. We set up your online banking. So you can walk out there and you're all live and dangerous, ready to do business. So 7 years has passed since we launched, and during that time we've now quoted on the stock market. We've now got 1.1 million customer accounts. We've got 52 stores. I'm pleased to say that because we opened our 52nd store in Liverpool Street today. So great success there in the city, happening in the city. And in terms of our results, not only got that many stores, but we've we've borrowed and had in deposits 10.8 billion, and we lent 8.6 billion. Been in profit for the last 4 quarters, and we've just had our sort of focus on customer service acknowledged by the MoneyWise Customer Service Awards, where we won their most trusted financial provider for the 2nd year running. So, all in all, you've got a bank that's come from nowhere, really customer-centric, but really successful, and the growth plans over the next 12 months, we're opening about 12 new stores. I say stores because we see ourselves as a retailer that does banking, and it's building everything around the customer is important to us. If I look at the stores as well, even they're set up locally, so each store, like Harrow's, got a local director, me, we've got a store manager to run the store, cover the shift patterns, and a local business manager. And then I've got a wider group of internal colleagues who have certain specialisms, be they asset finance, invoice finance, or whatever. And again, I work with those to introduce business. Harrow store itself has only been open for 2.5 years, but I'm pleased to say the growth has been phenomenal. We're about 3rd in the bank overall, about 52 for new account openings. Now I might like to think that's all down to the fact that I've been in the local area working for over 40 years. Or it's my fact I've worked for 2 banks and a building society, so I've got a good rounded experience. But it's not that. It's the fact that me and my team at Harrow all have a shared passion to deliver excellent customer service to the people that we serve in the community. And that really permeates in everything we do. It is that sort of customer-centric focus that we have, and one that we want to continue delivering. So in terms of next steps, in the packs, there is a Join the Revolution brochure if you want more information about Metro. There's also a handout, it's my business card and contacts for all the local people and what they do, providing services. And also I popped in there our buy-to-let rates for professional mortgage landlords in case you might be interested. There's also some Galliard Homes paraphernalia there as well, which they very kindly put there with ours as well. So basically, I'm going to finish now. Metro Bank are here to provide banking services to the people in the local community. I would encourage you to try us if you haven't done so already. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Richard. It reminds me of the Indian shops, open all hours and do everything. So can we have David Galman, Sales Director from Galliard Homes, to say a few words?
Sharing a microphone.
Do you want this ready now?
Might be better, yeah. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Galman. I'm the Sales Director at Galliard Homes, which is one of the largest privately owned residential property developers in London. I started working in the residential property sector when a monopoly board actually gave a fair reflection of prices in the city, and long before London started to be widely acclaimed as the world's greatest and often most expensive capital city. Whilst there will always be pockets of the city that buck the trend, there's no doubt that in areas with high supply, London has seen a 20% correction in the price of new build stock. On top of this, the pace of growth in the traditional housing market has slowed. Correction means reduction, we just like to call it correction, it sounds a little bit better. There's a number of reasons for this. The first and most obvious is, of course, the B word, which has caused considerable uncertainty in the short term. As a result of Brexit, potential buyers have had to stop and think about their individual wealth and financial security, and this increased caution has inevitably had a knock-on effect on the market. Secondly, as we all knew and was confirmed last week, mortgage rates are on the rise and will continue to increase probably until we arrive at a 1% base rate. That's what we're told. Whilst we're not going to see a return to the draconian rates of the late 80s and early 90s, the psychological impact of a period of rising interest rates, however small, is bound to dampen the market. The third reason is difficult to comprehend. At a time when the rental sector has arguably never been more indispensable, with an increasing number of first-time buyers finding it difficult to afford the deposit necessary to buy their own home. So having access to the rental market, the government has decided to ostracise buy-to-let investors by hitting them with greater regulation, greater stamp duty costs and restrictions on income tax relief. The action can only result in lower buy-to-let investment, a lower rental housing stock and higher rents. It's a strange policy by any standards. Clearly the effect of each of these factors is magnified in London because of its greater growth pro rata to the rest of the UK over the recent past. At this stage in previous cycles, other regions have managed to close the gap with London, largely thanks to ready access to mortgages. The gap has started to close again in this cycle, but this time the cause has more to do with better communications, such as HS2, and the general structural shortage of property in and around the capital. The final reason for the sluggishness in this London market is that prices are too high, and they are too high for the simple reason that there are not enough new homes being built. It's simple economics that when demand exceeds supply, prices rise, and demand has exceeded supply now for many, many years. The problem is UK-wide, but as ever, greatly emphasised in London. And the solution? Only true political will have any effect. Certainly not the vacuous rabble-rousing that has dogged the industry for decades now. So you may well ask after that introduction, what's the good news? But thankfully there is quite a lot. London has always been a solid medium-term bet, and by that I mean, through a host of downturns, this city has always bounced back, with greater price growth and more construction starts than the corresponding period of the last cycle. This was true of the early 80s, the early 90s, the 2000s, and the robust recovery and boom which followed the credit crunch. Now both Savills and PwC are predicting a return to growth by 2019. So what does London, this great city, have to offer? A stable currency, strong rule of law, a convenient location at the midpoint of major time zones, a perpetual process of reinvention and regeneration, the world's leading financial centre behind New York, the third largest high-tech zone next to the city of Shoreditch, and the largest concentration of world-class universities that continue to attract the brightest and the best from across the planet. I could go on, but they've limited my time. And whilst Brexit may have caused a slowdown in domestic transactions, Sterling's realignment has attracted an influx of foreign buyers to fill that void. What has become true is that all London's glittering gifts mean a home in zones 1 and 2 costs an average now of £795,000. This has pushed the market to outer London, where the same home costs £500,000, and the commuter belt, where average prices are £315,000, which gives buyers much more for their money. Crossrail will have a huge influence on where one can live while still working and playing in the capital. This has already been reflected in an increase in construction starts and steady price growth along its route. At the end of Q1 2017, there were almost 24,500 units under construction along the route, with a further 42,000 with planning but unstarted. At Galliard, we've seen a significant demand and growth along the route and remain very confident that developments within 10 minutes walk of a Crossrail station will continue to benefit from the allure and outpull from the market. Help to Buy has been extended by a further £8.6 billion, and the government estimates this scheme will allow another 146,000 people to buy their own homes. Despite the introduction of permitted development rights, the planning process is still in need of a major overhaul by central government. The current process causes unacceptable delays, which are often blamed on greedy developers, whereas the fault lies squarely with the town halls across the country. Construction work cannot commence in a timely manner, which adds to the pressure on house price growth because of the lag in supply. Permitted development has, however, proved a godsend for the market, allowing developers to get planning on buildings far more quickly and develop small units that are well located, affordable, and with very attractive rental investments as well. The low entry point has so far enabled almost 2,000 first-time buyers and investors to buy a home from Galliard within a half-an-hour commute of central London. So, despite the negative in today's markets, in our view, these are far outweighed by the positives, and we're optimistic for the future, both for ourselves at Galliard and for our buyers. And before I finish, I thought I'd return to the subject of Brexit. I was talking to a gentleman in the foyer who was happy to share with me the fact that he'd voted leave in the referendum. I asked him why. Because my mother-in-law has recently emigrated to Spain, he replied. I said, why did that make you vote leave? He said, I want to make sure she doesn't come home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Now, Roshan Patel, do you want to say a few words? Roshan Patel is a local director of Metro Bank.
Good evening, all. Yes, my name is Roshan Patel, local director for Slough Store. Joined Metro Bank back in 2011, and it's been quite the journey. I promised Richard that I'll keep it really short and sweet, so I'm not much for words. No, I'm not. I'll just leave you with one quick thought, all right? And it's the reason why you're all here. So I'm sure most of you have all visited a Metro Bank store, and I guarantee there's 40 people in this room that have a safety deposit box. The question that I'd leave you is, if you trust us with your valuables, when will you allow us to give you some of your money in return? Does that make sense? So if there's 40 people who've got a safety deposit box, I'd love to at least talk to 80 and give you a bit of our money. Thank you, folks.
I want to say a few words. Alex Beerby is the Regional Commercial Banking Director for Metro Bank.
Evening, everyone. Roche and I work together. I have absolutely no idea how to follow that, so I'll give you a little bit of a brief on what we do. So, I look after one of the bank's regional commercial lending businesses. So I would imagine there's probably quite a few people who will want to know maybe a little bit more through the Q&A, but I'll give you a brief history on what we've done. I joined the bank 4.5 years ago, at which point we were just embarking on our commercial offering, which at that stage, I think most of you will appreciate that most of the other banks who were open for business were incredibly closed for business. So it started out incredibly well for us. It's gone from strength to strength. So our region now covers West London, right down to Southampton, so the entire Thames Valley territory, also up as far as Surrey, and right the way out to will be Swindon at the end of the year. And we are here to talk about all your commercial banking needs in terms of, especially tonight in terms of real estate finance, both on the commercial investment piece and also on the residential investment. We can quite happily go into product offerings and things like that a little bit later, but for those of you that have supported us so far, I know there are some faces in the crowd that have done. Thank you very much, and we look forward to speaking to the rest of you later to do some more business with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Can I introduce Jay Sangricha, partner at Price Bailey.
Hi everyone, my name is Jay Sangricha. I'm from a firm of chartered accountants called Price Bailey. I'm a tax partner specializing in property tax at the firm. And we're a medium-sized firm with 30 partners and 400 staff, spread over 7 offices, mainly East Anglia, and in London we have offices in the City of London and in Mayfair. We work with owner-managed businesses, and our biggest sector is in the property field, and we advise clients like yourselves. I'm afraid we don't offer safe deposit boxes. That's an idea we might start doing. But yes, we offer a range of services that a chartered accounting firm would advise on, including accounting and tax services, but it also ranges in terms of corporate finance and insolvency side of it. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the changes to tax on property. We've got a Chancellor's budget coming up next week, and I'm expecting further changes. Hopefully nothing too negative further, because we've gone through a lot of change so far. But we'll be covering that a little bit further on during the questions. Thank you.
Simon Farrell, QC from 3 Raymond Buildings. Wherever you come.
Good evening, everybody. I'm afraid my message tonight's rather depressing. The tax man is certainly active at the moment as we speak. This was brought home to me just a couple of weeks ago when I was in the tax tribunal representing one of the leading barristers in the country who dealt with stamp duty. HMRC had come to see him in his chambers, asked him to stop giving advice about avoiding stamp duty. He refused. He then actually faced a criminal inquiry to start with when they looked at his own personal tax return. That didn't go anywhere. But then they did him for deliberate tax evasion. Thus, we ended up in the tax tribunal. Fortunately, he was given a clean bill of health, and all those decisions were quashed. But the message is, from our side as barristers, is we're seeing increasing aggression by HMRC, both in terms of the civil process, but also in terms of the criminal process. The tide has undoubtedly gone out. Although it was acceptable on one level, perhaps never acceptable, but you could get away with seeking major tax reliefs by entering film schemes, share loss relief schemes, even EZTs. Those days have really now disappeared because there have been a number of decisions from the Supreme Court just in the last 6 months actually, which are exposing the weakness of those schemes. And another feature of it is that the taxpayer may have sought a relief, for example, in 2008, and an inquiry by HMRC will literally go on for 7, 8, sometimes 9 years before it reaches resolution. And the message at the moment, I'm afraid, is undoubtedly that one should avoid getting involved in such arrangements. The pressure to do so, of course, has been heightened as a result of the stamp duty changes, which are hitting people and the market particularly hard at the moment. But I'm sorry it's a depressing message, but I think I hope it's a wise one to you, that I would avoid all such schemes at the moment unless they are whiter than white, if I can put it that way. So far as safety deposit boxes are concerned, I've had a few cases involving those recently, but I'm not here to talk about money laundering, which is my other area of expertise. So I'll say no more than that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. And just taking something you said, which is the tide has come in.
Yeah.
There's a saying, you don't know who's swimming naked until the tide comes in.
Well, when the tide goes out, you can see who hasn't got their trunks on.
Ellis Serene, barrister from Boundary Chambers.
Hi there, I'm another barrister. You get 2 for the price of 1 this evening. I work with Simon. All I'll say is if you meet me in a professional capacity, you've probably done something rather naughty or been rather unfortunate. I'll only reinforce what Simon says. It's quite true. More and more we're seeing HMRC out to get you. If you're lucky, you end up in the tax tribunal. If you're unlucky, it's the Southwark Crown Court. I'd only add one thing to what Simon said. You will find people perhaps going around touting schemes that they tell you can can save you a lot of money in tax. These will often be accompanied by an opinion from a barrister. Just one word of advice whenever you're considering one of those. Look very carefully for the word if. These opinions will usually be done entirely in good faith. They will be done with considerable legal skill, but they will be based on a set of assumed facts. So if you're ever tempted to take up one of these schemes, just try and remember this evening, try and remember what I said, look for the word if. Look for the assumptions of fact that are made in the opinion or in the advice, and think very carefully as to whether you fall into those assumed facts. Right, the second frightener will sit down now.
So let's start now with the questions to the panel. The first one is for Jay Sangrecha and David Goldman. How has the tax environment changed with respect to the property market in the UK over the last few years, including further changes which are being phased in, and what are the specifics? Shall I pass this across?
Hi, I'm just going to talk about the tax changes that have occurred over the last couple of years on property investors, for buy-to-let investors. And the biggest one that has affected quite a lot of our clients is the interest relief that has been over a period of 4 years is being removed or reduced to the basic rate of income tax. So you get relief at 20% instead of your marginal rate of tax, and starting from, it's already started from April 17, where there's a 25% restriction, and then it goes to 50% next year, 75% in the third year, and 100% in the fourth year. So that's affecting a lot of people who are borrowing to buy their investments, and people are looking at how they might restructure in terms of a better way of getting tax relief. So that's one of the major changes, but also I think it's been referred to a little bit earlier. the 3% additional SDLT doesn't help on top of the high rates of SDLT on residential property that already exists. So on second properties, paying 3% is having a big impact as well. And then there are additional factors which sometimes people forget about. The wear and tear allowance, 10% has been removed, where you could get a deduction at 10% of the net rent that you could claim. Now it's on the actual expense that is incurred for maintenance or repair costs that you can claim. The CGT reduction, the capital gains tax rate went down to 20% from 28% if you've been involved with that. The only asset where it still remains at 28% is on residential property. So you can see the government is picking on residential property owners, especially investors, in terms of saying things have got too difficult in terms of the price, the house prices. So trying to calm it down a little bit. And finally, the other one, which probably won't affect a lot of you, is residential property which is owned by overseas companies. They are affected by inheritance tax now, because a common form of planning for people who are non-resident or non-domiciled was set up an offshore company to invest in the property. Nothing illegal, I should say, in doing that. You're entitled to set up an overseas company and provide, you're filing returns in the UK, non-resident landlord returns. It's perfectly fine to do. But they are now within the inheritance tax bracket, where previously they were not, because you own shares in a company and not the property directly. So those are the major changes on tax that have occurred in the recent past, which are trying to calm the market down a little bit in terms of, especially in London. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not very much to add in respect of the tax changes. Joe's going to be far more of an expert than me, other than, of course, stamp duty. The 3% stamp duty for investors has been a bit of a killer. I suppose a number of developers have taken it on the chin and will include it, and will find a way to assist purchasers, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help as well, stamp duty in respect of personal purchases. When you start to purchase over £1 million, do you want to give the government £100,000, or would you rather build an extension on your house that you've already got? And you're seeing that happen in certain areas. We've got to hope that for the first-time buyer market, and there have been whispers and rumours, but no one knows until next week, that they might reduce or do away with stamp duty for first-time buyers, the genuine first-time buyers, perhaps up to a certain price point. That may not help too much in London, but perhaps on the suburbs and so on.
Thank you. Next question. With respect to the first question about the new taxation that impacts property, what are the ways we can restructure and generally mitigate in order to reduce the tax leakage? Jay, do you want to take the mic again?
Oh, right. Yeah, again, a very common question that we get asked in terms of mitigating the loss of interest relief, as to what the options might be. And I'm sure that most of you would have heard that a corporate vehicle, a limited company, might be a good solution to that. But there are a range of options that you should look at. And basically, they all come down to numbers. And, at the end of the day, I'm an accountant, so I talk about numbers. And the numbers are one of the things that you have to look in terms of calculating what the impact would be of investing through a company. But before I just cover that, I want to just mention something my barrister colleagues referred to about schemes, and particularly in this area of how to get around the issue of interest relief being restricted, and also not having to pay up to 45% on the net rent. There are various schemes, some of them referred to as hybrid schemes, which look at transferring the beneficial interest but not the legal ownership. There's also something referred to as the beneficial interest company trust that people talk about. These are all structures which very much come with a barrister's opinion attached to them. You know, we listened to what was said before. You've got to be very careful in looking at a scheme like that. If it looks too good to be true, then it probably is. And you've got to, you know, what you don't want to find is, yeah, it works for a year or two, and then the revenue hit it hard, and they're able to go back and charge penalties, you know, substantial penalties in terms of doing something like this. So what I'm going to briefly refer to is something which is less of a problem. You still got to be very careful in how you structure it, is to actually either buy any new properties in a limited company is one of the options. And we also talk to people about maybe transferring, if you're a portfolio of properties or if you're a portfolio landlord, being able to transfer the properties into a company. And there, in that area, there's substantial amount of SDLT and potentially capital gains tax which would be due, and how you might structure something to minimize that or avoid that arising. And that's, you know, fraught with a lot of dangers as well. Happy to discuss that further, but it'd be better if we did it, you know, one-to-one in terms of discussion. But yes, that's possible. You know, one of the options I always say is consider one of the options, which is do nothing. Just stay as you are, and there's nothing wrong in comparing that option to making changes which, you know, could have a big impact. A lot of people will talk about, you know, incorporating portfolio of properties. The risk you have there is that you can't reverse the transaction. Once you've done it and the revenue don't like it, you would end up with SDLT on the transaction and a large capital gains tax bill. And you can't reverse that. You know, it's once you do a transaction in law, it's happened, and the tax consequences will follow on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Roshan, can we have your insight to the same question?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the tax questions, obviously Jay's the expert there, and obviously we defer to his answer there. But I think what I could talk about from a banking standpoint is trends. So the trends that we're seeing now, probably especially in the last 2 to 3 years, is more purchases on the commercial side. So less resi, buy-to-let, and we're seeing much more on the commercial side, where we're packaging more of the commercial lending in place. So, I mean, that's that really, and that's that, yeah.
Okay. Next question. If we find a tax solution, do we need to also ensure that it is compatible with our borrowing strategy? Because it's all well and good to structure something, but can we get the lending? After all, when you buy a property, it's only a quarter, typically, that's made up from your own equity. The rest comes from lending. Do you want to answer that, Ali?
Yeah, thank you. It's, as you can imagine, it's a question that we get asked quite a lot at the moment. And really, as far as our structures are concerned, I mean, the one key differential between what we do and possibly what people have experienced before is that we are very much about the customer. So most of what we do is based around the experience, the background, the history, and the stability of the customer themselves. As far as responsible lending is concerned, we have to be in a position where we will be comfortable with lending money into a structure that does not look like it's going to fall over in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And we've all been subject to that at times, where, you know, it's easy to be an LTV lender in the marketplace. It's easy to short-term bridge. We won't work on that basis. We will work on a much, much longer-term structural basis. I think, you know, what Roshan and Jay alluded to earlier on is probably the key, the important factor is that your tax advisors, your accountants, and your lawyers will always be the most important factors behind how you choose to structure it. But once that structure is in place, we will also consult with them in terms of making sure that they're satisfied. If your lawyers and your accountants are satisfied that the structure stands up, I'm not saying we'll lend to every single structure, but it is always done on a case-by-case basis, and as long as we have the right balance of people and structure behind it with the right guidance and the right advice, then I don't see any reason why we wouldn't do that. I think just on the LTV piece, you know, we've all seen days where the common question to the banks was, what loan to value can you get to? And that was generally, the answer would be whatever you wanted it to be, providing the property was worth enough. Because of the changes, and more particularly because of the changes on the relief side of it, it is now the serviceability and that net income that is of key, it's a key piece for us. So ultimately it comes down to affordability, and it's that structure that you'll discuss with your accountants and your solicitors to make sure that that sits within the legalities, and as long as that stacks up and we can then put in place a borrowing requirement which will work on an affordability basis. Sometimes that is a little bit tighter than we've seen in the past, but we would rather be the guys that support you for the next 20, 25, 30, 40 years through one generation, 2 generations, 3 generations, than be the bank that says, let's make a quick buck right now and tell you to go and rebank in 5 years because we've made a mistake.
Thank you. Next question. What should we watch out for with regards to avoiding tax schemes that appeal to our fears and greed to reduce or eliminate tax leakage, but in reality get us into a worse position as they are not guaranteed to be legal and bulletproof? Simon and Ellis, do you want to take the lead on this?
Yeah, well, it's taking forward what we've said already. I just happened to be reading a 60-page advice a couple of weeks ago from a tax QC. A huge document, full of technicalities. And it was part of a package of documents which had been given to someone to persuade them to enter into something called a share loss relief scheme. And the scheme was an obvious load of nonsense. I mean, you could see that just from a quick look at it. The proposition was that shares would be bought for £10 on day one, and then they'd be sold about a week later at some huge loss that then would be claimed against tax. It was called the Angel Tax Relief Scheme, which frankly is quite appropriate because it was up there in the clouds with the angels. But what I found most extraordinary reading the tax opinion was, you know, if you're an ordinary punter and some financial advisor comes to you with this package of documents and presents you with a 50-page, 60-page advice from the Queen's Counsel, you're obviously going to think it's all right. But then you delve into the advice and actually find they're buried at the very end, in the last paragraph. It actually said these words. It said, if this arrangement is in place for commercial reasons, then relief will be achieved. But then, of course, there was nothing commercial about this arrangement at all. So it's what we've already been saying. That's an actual example. If anyone in this room gets a QC's opinion given to them to try and save tax, my advice is actually pretty much ignore it. I'd be extremely careful.
Alice, can we have your wisdom?
Well, it's exactly what Jay said. It applies to so many things in life. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. What we're saying here really is to trust your judgment and your instincts. And if your instinct tells you that something is dodgy, something is bent, then think very, very carefully indeed before getting yourself involved. I suppose another way to think about it is if you put your other hat on, your citizen hat on, if you thought as an honest taxpayer if somebody else was doing that, if that triggers outrage in you, then the scheme probably does not deserve much further scrutiny.
Thank you. Next question. What is the impact of the Panama Paper and the Paradise Papers when it comes to tax planning schemes? Jay Sangricha, do you want to take the lead again?
I hope all of you have heard about the Paradise Papers and seen the Panorama program where it picked out a number of people, Lewis Hamilton, with regard to a VAT recovery on aircraft and talk about Mrs. Brown's Boys, where they had payments made to a Mauritius company and lend them the money back. And the other one was talking about Apple, the famous Apple. Everybody, I think, has an iPhone or an iPad, and transferring their company from Ireland to Jersey in terms of what they've done. So there's a range of issues that were addressed in Panorama. Some of them you might say verged on tax evasion, but some of them were tax avoidance, and that's a very important distinction which our blessed government sometimes forget, that tax evasion is illegal and tax avoidance is legal, and that you know, it's important to remember that. Tax avoidance might be aggressive, and it's something that, you know, my firm would never recommend people to do. But it's difference that you have. Tax evasion is a criminal offense, and tax avoidance has civil penalties. Some of them are beginning to stray into the criminal field as well. So I think what I just wanted to say, and I'll pass to Simon as well, is he wants to say a couple of words. HMRC has got very limited resources, and they get squeezed quite hard by the government on how much money they can spend, how many inspectors they can employ, and therefore it's become quite hard for them to catch people. And they've adopted the carrot and stick approach. The carrot was offering a so-called amnesty, the Liechtenstein disclosure facility that was offered for people to make disclosure. And that was done with a set penalty that people paid on that. And then more recently, a couple of years ago, I think about 3 years ago, they came up with APNs, or accelerated payment notices, where if you did a tax scheme, they said, okay, you might have done something which might work, might not work. We've got to wait for a court to determine that. But you need to make a payment on account of the tax liability that we think will be owed on the amount. And a lot of people have, the whole tax avoidance industry is almost closed down because of accelerated payment notices and follow notices that come across. And finally, the latest one, which is in the finance bill at the moment, which is going through Parliament, is one called Requirement to Correct, which you have until September 18 to correct any offshore avoidance that you've carried out, or if you've got an incorrect tax return in the UK as a result of anything offshore. If you don't do that by that deadline, then they're going to increase the penalties to like 200% of the amount of tax that they consider due. So it's quite a hefty charge to have to pay. It's becoming quite hard. And at this point, I think I'll stop and let Simon say a few words as well.
Well, it's very interesting to hear what you've just said, because I suppose every time you see a barrister, it's not necessarily a very good thing at all, because it means you're in terrible trouble. And so far as tax is concerned, I have a very different perspective on it. I mean, when I'm sitting with one of my clients at Southwark Crown Court, who was, a perfectly respectable person who entered one of these schemes but ended up getting prosecuted and he's at court, he would say things like, well, I thought HMRC didn't have enough staff to deal with this. It didn't help him. And the truth is that the government have poured a lot of effort and money into this now, and they are getting quite serious about it. And also, interestingly, the courts have completely changed the law, particularly some Supreme Court decisions in recent times, because this interesting concept of avoidance is legal but evasion is criminal, I mean, is a ludicrous concept. It came from an old case in which a slightly pompous law lord had said, an Englishman is entitled to arrange his affairs in any way that he wants, and if he can avoid tax, that's fine. That was, I think, in the 1930s that was said. Two recent Supreme Court cases, one about the Barclays, senior Barclays bank employees who were avoiding most of their tax on their earnings, which was a scheme which failed recently, but another case very recently about Rangers footballers who were being paid, instead of the £100,000 a week they were being paid, they were only paid, I don't know, £1,000, and £99,000 was paid into a trust in the Bahamas that then gave the money to their families. And somehow, but the argument was, well, this wasn't an emolument, so this wasn't to be taxed. Obviously ludicrous, as the Supreme Court exposed literally, I think, about a month or two ago. So certainly from my perspective, but I think not only from that, this distinction between evasion and avoidance actually boils down to a simple English word, which is dishonesty. And in the scheme I described earlier, one could easily argue, well, that's just dishonest. I mean, you could argue that. And then it would be up to a jury to decide, under the new refined test of dishonesty just a couple of weeks ago by the Supreme Court, which is tougher on defendants. It would be up to a jury to decide whether that arrangement was dishonest or not. And if a jury decided it was dishonest, then you're guilty of a criminal offence. And when we spoke about the tide going out, what's actually happening now is that the HMRC used to prosecute if you put in fake documents and or told lies. And they used to treat the contrived tax arrangements as civil. But now they're treating those contrived tax arrangements as dishonest. And it's easy to do so. And in fact, most jurors faced with this sort of thing would quite easily conclude that the person doing it must have known it was all a load of nonsense. And, you know, that's dishonest. So that's what I'd say about that.
Thank you, Simon. So while there's some newsworthy anti-property tax changes in place or being phased in, there are some taxes that can be used to the advantage of the property investor. For example, things like CGT or using a SPV to reduce tax. Jay, do you want to take the lead on this again and talk about the legitimate ways we can reduce tax?
Not many, but yes, there are a few things that can be considered and would pass muster. I'll defer to my tax colleagues here to pick me up on anything that they consider aggressive. But if you take SDLT, for example, one of the ways residential property, the rates are quite high, and they on second properties can go up to 15%. One of the ways is if you're transferring, say if you're talking about transferring into a limited company and you're transferring 6 or more properties, that's a bulk purchase, then commercial rates of SDLT apply, which is at 5% maximum. So you can reduce that down. Also, if you've got mixed-use properties, so if there's a shop with flats above that, that would be called a mixed-use property if it's done in one transaction, then that will suffer a commercial rate, not a residential rate of SDLT. And I believe it's also a case that if you contract in the same document where the residential property is, say, in Harrow, and there's a little commercial property somewhere else in the UK, that you purchase in the same contract, then commercial rate of SDLT will apply to that. So that's one possibility of reducing rates of SDLT. The other little things I will talk about is in terms of making sure that all the expenses which can be offset on property against the rental income are claimed in a right and proper manner. They've got to be business expenses, but if, for example, if you've got a property portfolio and you're using your home to carry on that business activity, you've got your computer there, you work in an office within your home, then there are certain expenses that you can claim as a deduction. It's a home office expenses deduction that you will be entitled to. And we have what's called a general anti-abuse rule in the UK, and by its definition, it's a general rule to say if you carry out anything that the revenue don't like or the government doesn't like, then that can be beaten down. But transferring to a spouse, so if you're on a higher rate of tax on your rental income, and the spouse is either not working or is on a lower rate band, then you can transfer property which is not, transferring to a spouse is free of capital gains tax, and that way you can reduce your tax bill. You can also put it into joint ownership and transfer income that way to a spouse. That will help reduce your tax bill. Talked earlier about transferring into a limited company, so I'm not going to say a great deal more on that, but that's certainly a possibility that you can look at. Make sure that if in the past you've not paid attention to any rental losses that you might have made in earlier years, that you look at that and make sure that the rental losses are brought forward so that you can use them against future rental profits that arise. So that's another thing you can look at. And finally, one other one to mention is if you've actually lived in that buy-to-let property yourself, then you can claim the principal private residence exemption for the period that you occupied it, or you may even be able to move into your buy-to-let and stay in there for a little while to claim this principal private residence exemption. It's not just on paper, you've got to actually move in, and it's going to be your proper home if you're going to make that claim. So it's just give you a few ideas on what you might do from a tax point of view.
Thank you. Ali, we have your input on the same question. Do you remember it?
So I guess, yeah. Good point. So I guess, look, I think Jay's probably covered off from an expertise perspective. Obviously, we are not tax advisors, and we will always, I said earlier, we will always defer to the tax specialists on that subject. I guess what I can allude to on the back of that is how we would then structure, and actually what we have seen a fair bit of recently is the bulk property transfers. Now again, as long as they are done according to the letter of the law, by the accountant's advice, and from the legal perspective, then we actually offer, and I think Richard also mentioned earlier on that he's put a rate sheet into each of the folders that are in there. But we do have a professional landlord option, which provides you with the opportunity to have all of your portfolio put into one structured long-term interest-only borrowing matrix. Again, there's a whole host which I won't bore you with now, but if anyone does want to fall asleep later, feel free to come and catch me. But there's a list of things that we would generally go through, but anywhere from from the 6 that Jay was talking about, which works from the tax perspective, we can take that up to as almost as high as you would like to, and be able to lend against that, providing it is structured within the correct vehicle. So as far as we're concerned, that actually simplifies the process for us. Not only that, what it does do is that, I mentioned the affordability piece earlier on, we will always apply, and as will most banks, will always apply a sensitivity analysis to any income on top of the net rental income that you have. And that's just to build in a little bit of a buffer zone, which can be for a variety of things, notably the interest rate increase that we had fairly recently. Having it in a limited company automatically reduces the amount of sensitivity that we apply to it. So you'll generally find that if your structure is correct, if you've been, you've got your right structure in place with your accountants and your lawyers, we will generally be able to leverage to a slightly higher level through a limited company than we will from a personal perspective, and that's just because the structure is more conducive to better savings as far as your taxation is concerned.
Thank you, Lenny. Is the answer perhaps not to swim upstream against the tax reality, but to look for where the best profits are to be found by taking the tax environment into account? Swim round the problem rather than trying to redirect the waters. David Gallman, do you want to say a few words about this?
Definitely not qualified to talk about tax and money, but people here are. I suppose the answer is you've got to look at what you should be buying if you're looking to buy a property investment, and you don't want to have a huge outlay in terms of SDLT and other tax situations. Look at smaller, lower price stuff, look at stuff outside London, look at regeneration zones, look at what the government have done. Thankfully, the only good thing they've done in respect of planning is permitted development. That is going to come to an end, I'm sure. It has driven office rents up because we've all gone out and bought loads of empty office buildings, turned them into small micro flats, which has enabled purchasers to get on the ladder for their own purchase. for their first time buyer, or for investors to build up a small portfolio of tiny flats where they're, I don't know, they might be paying £250,000 for a one-bedroom flat or a studio just on the outskirts of London. So their costs are much, much lower. So that's one way of looking at it, to look to diversify, I suppose.
Thank you. Jeff, do you want to say a few words about this?
Yeah, I think in terms of talking around on the tax front, I've talked about some of the areas already. In terms of alternatives, you know, the corporate route is one of the better ways. People talk about the corporate route, but you could be careful in terms of bearing, you know, all the costs in mind to actually run a company. Does lead to administration costs and you know, the bureaucracy that goes with it. Yes, you get the 19% corporation tax rate applying to the rental income, which is dropping hopefully to 17% in 2 years' time, in 2020, sorry, 3 years' time, which you know is very efficient and is a good way. But then you've got to look at extracting profit out of the company, and dividend tax applies in that scenario. Again, can be managed provided you spread the investments around, and a corporate vehicle is actually quite a good way of spreading your investments around the family, where if somebody is on low earnings or is on not applying their tax bands, the basic rate band and their personal allowances, then you can use that for paying dividends. So in terms of planning, is actually a good opportunity to look at structures like that, because it is very much a way of both dealing with inheritance tax, where shares can be gifted to, say, grandchildren, and used to pay dividends, where they can then use it to finance their school fees or their university fees. So planning of that nature, which is long-term planning, is available with a corporate structure. So worth looking at carefully.
Thank you. Roshan, do you want to say a few words on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's only two ways to look at it, right? You're either swimming or you sink. So it's our jobs as collectively as everyone on this panel, as barristers and accountants and bankers, to ensure that you swim, right? We want to ensure that you make it across the channel and be found at the bottom of the channel, right? In terms of the tax environment, again, as Ali stated, can't really speak on that. Obviously, Jay's going to be the kind of expert there. But what I would state is, from a banking perspective, is get to know your bank managers. Make sure they're working with you. So regardless if it's Metro Bank or whoever it is, what I'd say is ensure that the relationship's there so they understand what your long-term goals are and know what products they're offering you. So if it's a commercial deal, if it's an intergenerational deal, if it's help to buy, whatever it may be, just make sure that that fits right for you so you can swim and not sink.
Thank you. Okay, let's summarize. So we've heard how tough the environment has become and how tax changes have transformed the property market. Sow and Reap have a long track record in central London, and we have certainly observed transactions dropping by nearly a half. The answers from the panelists have been excellent and very insightful, so we'll start taking some questions from the audience. One insight for me is that a boxing match is often won before the fighters even enter the ring. The same goes for adversity, like tax changes. Where there is change, there is opportunity. Whatever curveballs the government throw at us, we need to remain strong, searching for solutions which may not be obvious in the first instance. As an example, as a firm, we have moved into pre-planning land and gaining planning permission and then selling on to a developer. There is either low stamp duty in this transaction or no stamp duty if we're buying the SPV which owns the asset. There's no mortgage to offset because the transaction is done in cash, and we can minimize the exit taxes if we sell the company from the share point of view, as capital gains tax is much lower than all other types of tax. What is crucial with this approach and other workable solutions is that the tax tail does not wag the property dog. What I mean by this is, however tough the tax environment, you must keep your eye on the main prize, that being the property returns. So now I'm going to hand over to the audience. If anybody has any questions, you can take the mic, and then please address it to the person you want to answer it.
Thank you very much to Thank you very much to the panel and Metrobank. My experience of Metrobank has been slightly different to what you've described, but hopefully that will be rectified soon.
Thank you.
We can't get better if you don't know.
Check's not in the post.
Cash will be gladly accepted. My question to the panel is, obviously we have seen a lot of changes coming through by the government in view of the market conditions changing, especially the rise in buy-to-let properties and SDL. Do you think there is a possibility that the government might reverse the whole thing again in 4 years, 5 years' time, and throw the whole planning again into a disrepute on the basis that everybody is trying to get into the bandwagon of transferring the properties into commercial or a limited company, only to find that that might, fire back? And the second question is to Metrobank. Do you finance commercial properties when purchased through the auctions? Thank you.
Who wants to take the lead on that question?
I can do the second part. So, do we finance through auction purchases? The simple answer is yes, we do. Now the thing is, obviously, with timescales, you generally tend to have a 28-day exchange completion. The advice I do have actually goes back to something that Roshan said, is that speak to us. What we generally tend to do is we will put in place almost a blanket amount. So we'll have a discussion with you to start with. We'll get an idea of exactly what it is you're looking at, what sort of round figures you're looking at in terms of the properties, areas, and then we'll almost approve you an amount of money subject to the property. What then happens is that you have a funding line that's essentially in place. You haven't drawn it, so you're not paying any money on it. No one wants to pay any money on something they're not using. But you have an agreement, so you would be able to walk into the auction, subject to everything being okay, and say, right, I know I have £1 million that Metrobank have said, subject to the property being X, Y, and Z, I'll be okay. Now, the other thing that we do have, and we've started doing this a little bit more with auction purchases, is that depending on who you are with, and if you want to come and have a chat with me later, I'm more than happy to, our teams will come out to the auction with you. We are more than happy to do that. We will come and sit at the auction, because a lot of the questions we get asked sometimes is that, it's all well and good you saying to us, you'll fund this one. Well, I've just paid the exchange, and now I've come to you and said, here's the property, and you've said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that one. So we will come out, our teams will come out with you, with the criteria that we've got, and be there by your side whilst you go through the process. That's what we're here to do.
Okay, can I just add on to that?
Of course you can, yeah.
Do you do leverage?
When you say leverage, how do you mean?
Obviously, guarantees on the properties that obviously are owned by the investors.
So, all right, so you have properties already, and what you're saying is actually, would we advance you a cash release so that you could then go out and purchase at auction without having to have a funding line in place for the auction itself?
In both ways.
Yeah, no, we can absolutely arrange that. Now, again, the thing is, and this is probably going to go back to more the accountancy, the legal side, the money laundering regulations are much tighter than they've ever been. Rightly or wrongly, everyone has an opinion on it, but that makes it very difficult for us to say, actually, we will just advance you. If you have £1 million equity in your portfolio, we will just advance you £1 million, go off and do what you want with it. It makes it very difficult for us to, and any banker, to do that at the moment. Again, with that, what we can do is we can agree the advance subject to. So we can even process all the security side of it behind the scenes. So you're secured, you're ready, your portfolio is already done, you know you have £1 million against your existing portfolio, and the minute you have that auction property agreed and ready, then we're in a position to advance the funds and say, right, here we go, let the lawyers do their bit. Because one of the advantages with auction purchases is that a lot of the pack comes with many of the searches and many of the documents that generally take a lot of time to obtain. So because that hard work is automatically done, there should be no reason why we cannot be in a position where we can get you from the exchange and completion to within 28 days. The difficulty we do have is if someone comes to us on the day of the auction and says, I need the money in 4 weeks, then I'm afraid we probably will lag a little bit behind.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Who wants to answer the first part of the question?
I have a go. I think your question is like $50,000 question. The government is, the Treasury is very much faster. They started employing some clever people. They're very much faster in making changes to the law where they see something that is being done which loses some tax, and in these austerity days, they try and stop a lot of the planning that is done. So it's not predictable, really to say, yes, if you transfer into a company and you hope everything would be okay in a couple of years or 3 years or 4 years down the line, interest restrictions are brought within companies. It's not possible to say what might happen there. You can only talk about the law as it stands at present. And yes, a couple of days ago in the Times there was a reference to. There's a reference to SDLT that the rate has got too high, and the 3%, whether, for people that should be removed, and that's a possibility. Somehow I doubt it. It's a case very much of looking carefully at what's happening, what's making the government make the changes. And I think the other aspect I would mention is that all this area involves tax planning, and some of this planning, the courts have now started looking at the planning in a different way to what it used to do 10 years or 5 years ago even, in terms of how the judges react. Previously it was a letter of the law as in the legislation that was applied. Today, today is the spirit of the law. What did government, what did Parliament intend in terms of what this word or piece of legislation meant? And even if they haven't got it correct in the legislation, they will apply the intention of the law. So it makes it quite difficult in terms of saying, yes, you go ahead and incorporate into a company your property portfolio. Why did you do it? If you was to save tax, you would have a hard time with the revenue trying to argue with them that, no, there's a good commercial reason for doing it. So your intention is very important, and I'm the last person to ask about tax advice before you sort of get your commercial reasoning straight in terms of why you want to do something.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say one thing. I think it rather depends when the general election happens, because I think personally, if I may make a prediction, that the Tories will go, mainly because all this property stuff is all very well talking about how much money we can all make, but actually the truth is anyone under 40, they're just pretty much locked out of this wonderful market because it's all too expensive. And I think what's going to happen, if I may make a prediction, is lots of people will vote for Labour, and there will be more tax, and loopholes will be further closed. And I think actually you can argue that's a thoroughly good thing.
Perfect timing to give you the vote.
Sorry for
I agree with half of what you said. I think that there will be a change in government. Whether it's a good thing, who knows? It's very difficult to know what's going to happen in 2, 3, 4 years' time. From our perspective, what they actually need to do is to actually do more on the planning side with the local authorities. Forget central government. Central government are not particularly actually that interested. They say they want to build X amount of homes, but they're not making it easy to do so. What we need is for the local authorities, and especially in London, we need the GLA to stop this obsession with strategic industrial land. which is their current obsession, which is a completely pointless exercise, and allow us to build houses and allow housing associations to build affordable houses. There's plenty of them are awash with money, but they can't get the planning. Simple as that.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
We're currently looking into purchasing students' accommodations, where the returns are much higher than if you look at the normal buy-to-let investment property. Does Metro Bank provide financing? I know you're not looking at the single, but maybe the 5 or 6 in one go.
Simple answer is yes. Happy to have a chat offers, but yes, we do.
Anybody else?
Hi there. Particular question for Jay. We've had a lot of clients come to us recently suggesting the idea of actually shifting properties from personal name into a corporate structure, and through various tax advisors, a couple of them seem to have actually managed to do it successfully, so to speak. One of the unique things I found about some of the clients was that their tax advisors would get prior HMRC approval in respect to having the property, which would typically be in joint names, incorporated into a limited company. Have you come across this, and do you think it's actually a legitimate way to actually go about doing this, especially with HMRC prior approval? And what are the risks associated with doing that?
Hi, yes. There is a process for getting assurance from the revenue. It's very much based on one tax that it applies, and that's not the bigger problem. So let me just explain. The process of transferring into a company involves 2 major taxes. One is capital gains tax, and the other one is FCRB. So as far as capital gains tax is concerned, the way that most people transfer their properties is by what's called incorporation relief, section 162, which means that you don't get a capital gains tax liability. It rolls into the shares in the company. So what's done is the property is transferred into the company in exchange for shares. And there is a process where you can write or non-statutory clearance, where you can write to the revenue and confirm with them that what you're transferring is a business. And there's been a significant case on this area called Ramsey, where this lady who had, I think it was 15 or so buy-to-lets, whether she was operating a business, and there's a lot of detail in that case about what amounts to a business. But basically it talks about active involvement in running the portfolio. It talks about dealing with the repairs and collecting the rent, and how much time you spent on doing it, and whether you're doing it on a commercial basis that you've got to look at. If it amounts to a business, then you will get this relief which avoids a capital gain arising. So that process, yes, you can get non-statutory clearance from the revenue on that. But the area which is a little bit more fraught in terms of problems is SDLT, because transferring into a company, and there's a way which, again, a lot of you might have come across, which involves a partnership transferring into a company, and a lot of the reports you'll see is that if you're a joint investor, maybe with your spouse, that you convert that into a partnership, and then the partnership transfers the properties into a company, and there's a specific exemption for SCRD for transferring from a partnership into a company, and that's the area which is got a lot of careful planning to do. because SCLT has a anti-avoidance provision referred to as Section 75A, which the revenue can apply and say, no, you did this for tax avoidance reasons or tax saving reasons, and this anti-avoidance provision would apply. And there's no clearance procedure for that, and obviously the SCLT costs can be quite hefty in terms of transferring property. So it's deemed to be transferred at market value. Does that help?
Thank you. There was a question over here in the corner.
I wonder if you could give us some more clarity or some more information about aggressive anti-avoidance schemes, as I seem to recall my last tax return asked about. So I think you're supposed to sign off on the basis that you aren't involved in, or if you are, you must declare what they are. I have no clue what they are. I'm pretty sure I haven't. So it would be useful to know a bit more.
Yeah, I can have a go at that. I mean, the tax return, on the tax return, you are required in law to declare if you've entered a tax avoidance scheme. And those types of schemes are the sort of things that I've been talking about. So if, for example, for example, if you're claiming, what frequently happens is people claim sideways relief. So they'll have their main activity as, say, a barrister, but then they'll be in a film scheme, which is a sort of partnership effort, and they'll go to Monaco and they'll generate all sorts of reports. And they'll really be pretending that they're working in a film business. And what will happen is they'll make a huge loss on that business, but then you're entitled to claim sideways loss relief, it's called, against your main barrister business or your doctor business or dentist, whatever it is. So that's what's being referred to. But as I said, what actually, I think you probably agree with this, what in the 1990s, these schemes used to work. But I don't think one's actually worked since about 2002. Now that's an awful long time ago, but many of these schemes are still being litigated today because of what I said earlier. HMRC literally can take 8 to 10 years, you know, to investigate. They then send a letter saying we've now decided you're entitled to this tax relief. And then it goes through the tax tribunal. If the schemes are particularly aggressive, I mean, I had one in the criminal courts recently, where someone, a very well-to-do ordinary person who earned a lot of money in the city, had entered one of these film schemes. In fact, he didn't really even do it for the money, he just did it because his mates were doing it. But he ended up at Southwark Crown Court, and luckily he was acquitted, but my God, it was close. And he lost everything. He lost his job, the legal fees he wasn't entitled to get back, because you can't get those back. And all he actually did, he's very happy-go-lucky, someone I saw him yesterday, he's lovely bloke. And he, sorry, I saw him this morning, you're right. A very nice bloke. He's really picking up the pieces of his life now, because he had the misfortune to enter one of these ridiculous tax schemes.
So if it's a more routine transfer into partnership, maybe into limited company, as Jay was just describing, that wouldn't be classified?
No, I don't think that would be classified as a DOTAS scheme, would it?
No.
It's not that kind of scheme.
The DOTAS scheme, which, you know, DOTAS stands for Disclosure of Tax Avoidance Schemes, is about package schemes promoted by what are loosely called tax boutiques, you know, who for a premium price will say, here's a product, here's the paperwork, it's all set.
QC's opinion.
QC's opinion comes as part of it. And you know, there's employee benefit trust, which was a Rangers case, and then there are film schemes. And quite a lot of these, I think DOTAS was introduced in 2006. 2006, and basically at that point, you know, the disclosure of this, what you refer to, you've got to put in your tax return, the reference number, which disclosure of tax avoidance scheme meant that the sponsor of the scheme, or the designer of the scheme, or the promoter had to tell the revenue, provide them with all the documents, so that the revenue were aware whoever's done it, because the number has to go on your tax return.
I don't think it applies to the sort of
So it
thing.
wouldn't apply, yeah. Tax planning is not the same as tax avoidance.
What's the difference between planning and avoidance?
No, that's when you get caught.
It's just the new word.
That's a legal question. I think the court can answer that.
Mitigation.
Mitigation. Thank you. Any other questions? One to the back.
Just to the Metro guys, from a property solicitor's perspective, we get a lot of clients who are buying freehold flats or flat leasehold properties with a very short term left on it. And the majority of your mainstream lenders shy away from lending, particularly to those with short leases, and they're kind of forced to go down the short route, route or private bridges, short-term loans. Do you guys, what's your view on lending on short leases?
It's probably, to be fair, not far off most of the other lenders.
Yeah.
The issue that it presents to us is more, again, it comes down to the affordability basis. That actually, if we have found ourselves in a position where we've geared someone up to the point where they can just about afford the amount of money they've taken out, as and when they decide to renew or extend that lease, there's a cost associated to that. Now, if we've put them in a position where they are short of the funds that are required on extending that lease, then by rights we are not being a responsible lender if someone is that tight on cash flow. So this, I suppose it goes back a little bit to the piece that I was saying earlier on about the loan to value piece, that this is so much more about the individuals and the affordability, and also working in tandem with people, that if you are working alongside a banker who is prepared to throw as much money at you as possible, they will be the first banker to disappear when things go horribly wrong. And we need to be in a position where we're doing that so responsibly, and that's where the short-term lease issue does kick in. Now, there are always, again, we take these on very, very individual basis. We have looked at some on slightly shorter-term leases. But what we've done on those very rare occasions is we've said, well, actually, let's look at the balance of funds that's available, and let's reach an agreement whereby at such and such time you will agree to renew that lease, and we know that the funds are available. Whether we then look at putting those into a fixed term deposit account so that they're also generating interest, there may be a reason why the customer does not want to use that cash at that time. So whilst in reality we're probably just as reluctant to do the shorter term leases, we do look at everything on a case-by-case basis. So if we have a valid reason, good affordability in the background, and we are not putting someone right up against the wall just because they want to extend a little bit more money, then we will absolutely have a look at it.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Particularly to the barristers and also Jay, you've given some fantastic ideas in terms of tax saving while the person is alive. Damn sure that when you die, the government's reaching out to take potentially 40% of your estate above the heroic band. Any valuable suggestions in terms of, yes, you may save tax while you're alive, what can you do to pass on generationally after that?
Well, one obvious way is if you're in a partnership with, say, your elderly parents, and you're carrying on a business, and upon the death, then there's no inheritance tax paid, because if you're in partnership with the person who dies, then the business can be carried on. Another good way is if you're a member of the aristocracy and you happen to own 6,000 acres. This is a really example. I won't name them. And you are renting out all your land as agricultural land, and you have tenant farmers, 16 tenant farmers on your 6,000 acres, who are actually getting subsidies from us as taxpayers, which is then getting passed on to the member of aristocracy who owns the 6,000 acres. You'll be interested to note that there's no inheritance tax due on the 6,000 acres. So members of the aristocracy, if there are any present, that's quite a good scheme for you to get involved in and be able to hand it over.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk about a slightly different area, and some of the planning is very basic, you know, in terms of planning for death, if you might call it that. Nobody knows when that might happen, but one of the things we recommend to our clients, and if you're in sort of reasonably good health, one of the simplest ways is to buy term insurance. That's not a savings policy. It's a pure assurance that if you die, the insurance company pays out, and you can buy cover. Inheritance tax is at 40% after the first 325,000 nil rate band. So you can calculate what your estate is worth and buy term assurance, which you've got to carry on paying premiums every month until death. But it's one of the ways which we recommend people that trusts are not a good idea. It used to be a common way of transferring assets. There are so many taxes now on trusts that we don't recommend them very often. It depends very much on the circumstances. But also other simple planning is actually to look at making gifts during your lifetime to your children and grandchildren, or whoever, to the mistress if you want to make gifts to them. That if you survive for 7 years, then that's what's called a potentially exempt transfer or a pet. And that falls out of your estate for inheritance tax. So, there are a number of opportunities to reduce death taxes in that way, if you wish to do that.
Thank you.
When you said giving gifts, to give a gift or a property, don't you have to outweigh that with capital gains tax? That will be payable on the gift, because most people assume, the common person assumes, well, I'm not getting any money, I don't have a capital gains tax policy. But in reality, we do have a capital gains tax policy because it's a market value. So doesn't one have to outweigh the potential inheritance tax problem compared to the capital gains tax? And if you're gifting it, would you have sufficient funds to pay that capital gains tax?
Quite right in terms of contradiction. If you were to die, your assets automatically, your estate or your successors in your will who are acquiring the assets pick them up at market value. So it wipes out the capital gain if you hold assets to death. So you're balancing the capital gains tax cost against the inheritance tax cost. Yeah, so it's absolutely right that if you make a gift, there's no basis to hold over the capital gains tax. You'll be looking at making a gift where there might be a lower capital gain, or you might be making a gift, say, of a jointly held asset where you do it over a period of years, so you do not give the whole asset in one go. You might, gift such that you're using annual exemption and perhaps the basic rate band in terms of the amount of gift that you make. So we've got clients who gift in small amounts over a period of years. More difficult to do with property, but if it's shares in a company, it's so much easier to value the shares and make a gift of the shares onto the family.
Can I just comment? Can I just comment on that one? If property has been transferred from the parents to the children, and obviously 7-year rule applies on as far as the IHT is concerned, is it right that the CGT is deferred until the property is sold?
I'm not sure on an IHT that if you survive for 7 years and the IHT falls out of charge, that the CGT is deferred. There is something called gift holdover relief, but that wouldn't apply to investment property. If it's a business asset, then yes, you can apply gift holdover, which will defer the capital gains tax.
Any further questions? One more over here.
So you mentioned earlier about SDLT, that if you transfer a number of properties into a limited company, then SDLT can be applied at the commercial rate. But I always thought that, say, if you had 3 properties of 350,000 each, liable to 5%
Sorry, do you want to hold the microphone closer so everybody can hear?
Yeah, if you had 3 properties at 350,000 each, liable to 5% SDLT, I thought if you transferred all of them together, then it's over £1 million and you get 10%. That's how the HMRC did it.
There are a couple of different exemptions for SDLT. So the one I was referring to earlier, which Ali also mentioned, is that if you're transferring more than 6 properties, then the commercial rate applies to that. If you're transferring mixed-use property, then the commercial rate will apply. But there's also another exemption which I didn't mention called multiple dwellings relief. And what that one does is, if you got a property which, say, one of them is $1 million or $1.5 million, to which 10% would apply, or $1.5 million where even 15% would apply. But you also at the same time buying property which is, say, 300,000, then you're allowed to average the price of the property and pay SDLT based on that average price. That doesn't require a lot of property. You can just buy 2 properties and average the price in that way. So I don't know if that's answering your question.
Maybe I would look into. But is that a specific number, 6 properties? Is that specific?
6 for bulk, for a commercial rate to apply, that's called bulk purchase relief. It has to be a minimum of 6 properties.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Have you had an experience of any limited company converting into a REIT structure, real estate investment trust structure?
A REIT structure, just for people who haven't come across, real investment, it's a vehicle which is basically a company structure that you would transfer your property assets into. If it's a UK REIT, it would need to be listed on the stock exchange. So it applies to pretty large transactions because the cost of setting up that REIT would be a lot, both in legal fees and also in terms of tax. But yes, transfer into a REIT, there are exemptions available to be able to do that. We're looking at that for a family at the moment where they have got around 50 million worth of assets, where it makes it worthwhile then transferring into a REIT. But you're looking at commercial property for a REIT.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
I was a bit surprised you said that the trust solution is not the right solution for avoiding inheritance tax. Is that correct?
I think what I'm saying is that there are quite onerous taxes on trusts, both on the transfer into the trust. There's an immediate charge, and also every 10th anniversary, you get approximately a 6% based on the asset value in trust that will be charged. So it might help with inheritance tax in the long term, but to have an immediate charge to inheritance tax on transferring into a trust is quite expensive. It's a 20% charge that you would have. So in that scenario, unless it's an old trust that you've had, with property inside for a long time, that's fine. But to set up a new structure now is almost
not recommended by tax advisors.
Okay. Any further questions? No? I think we've exhausted everybody. Okay, so thank you so much to the panel, and thank you to the audience for your interesting questions. We're going to close off with a prize draw that Richard is going to do.
Thanks very much. Didn't get your card in, I'm afraid it's too late. I'd like to ask George to come up from Asia Bush. I'll give you your card, George. Make sure it's not your own, please. Okay. Dilip Unmarket.
Dilip Unmarket.
And it's not here. And we've got, is he in Yang? Because it's quite bottle of bolly and some chocolates, please. I'm sure you have a good time tonight. And then, as you leave, there's a Metro Bank bag. You can take all this home. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Well done. I'd like to, as the joint sort of host, thank George very much for giving us the opportunity to work with you on this project. Hopefully you've gained a lot from this evening. We've really enjoyed it. I thank Jonty, who helped pull together everything last minute with all the Q&As and everything. Obviously my esteemed panel, but especially my two guys. What you don't know is the two original speakers both were ill, unable to make it, so these guys jumped into the frame, so I'm very grateful to them. And I say to Sim and the Metro Bank team, because behind the scenes has been quite a lot of organisation to make this all come together. So thank you for inviting and working with me, and hopefully do it again sometime. Lots of food and drink outside, so please don't
one more second. If you can, just one more minute. CB would like to say a few words to close off the evening.
Seriously, I had to request him for a few minutes. Genuinely, on 8th December '67, I bought my first property in this country. I wish I had so many tax advisors, and even criminal lawyers, and property developers. I said, first of all, George, I agree with you, Richard, that you've done a good job. So George and Suresh and you people. By the way, all of you, you may not know, all of you are my relations. Do you know that? Genuinely. How's that? In the Indian sense of caste, or African sense of tribe, or the British sense of class. He talked about 1.75 million people in the property business. In small or big, we are there. But don't be scared. When I bought my property, I bought quite a few properties, if I may say so. But this John Cumming is there or gone? They helped me a lot also in the past. All the questions about government and taxations and all these things, this is still a decent country to make money, as long as you're honest.
That's right.
So don't be so worried about this government. And I would also say, I bought properties and sold properties in the Labour administration, or Conservative administration, or the coalition administration. I said three things here. The British economy is better than many in the OECD or European because of our property base. So much money comes from abroad every year, 10 billion, 15 billion. Jay, I want to see you privately because I have someone to advise I might need also. But genuinely, I wish that when I was buying properties and selling properties and making a pound or two, I set up the advantage. All of you are here. When the food was served, the food is very good. I thought people will come. and the things that are boring, most of them will go very soon. At least 85% people are still here. That shows for the quality of the deliberation. And I tell you, genuinely, I've never seen, and David, I know you better, people who are here, at least 25%, I know their names or face, sometimes because of a dementia problem. You are older than any of you. I'm only going to complete 85 years in 4 months' time. Wow. 81 years. 81 years, but I'm going to Mamta, this is most serious thing. This what you have made me. George is not only my CEO, but he's a real trendsetter. Last year when we organized which in Victoria area, and others. So all of you are my relations, all of you are my cousins, but those who are my sponsors and advertisers are my first cousins. And one last thing, in this country, I lived in many countries, and I travel a lot. This is a fantastic country. Play by the book. We talked about something nice, Jay. Lecture of the law and spirit of the law. And I tell you, Ali and Roshan, I never met that Patel name. We got Roshan also, fantastic. Only complaint was that this is all, I'm glad nobody raised question, or gender discrimination on the main panel. That's not because of me. Don't worry, I can see her because, but there was actually planned, there were some ladies there, but at the last minute, man have to be nice to the lady. For whatever she not come, so Roshan came in her place. So she knew, I'm very grateful to you when you came. Make money. There's nothing like making money, but make it legally. Enjoy yourself. Thank you very much.
Asian House Homes magazine is due to be launched in a couple of weeks. There's still time for anybody to get involved. Speak to George, he'll give you a discount if you sign up today. Thank you.